Hello guys, Judgement here. I am sorry for the bad microphone in this video. I had some problems with my normal microphone, so I had to use an old, worse one. I'm gonna talk today a little bit about BWL, my first impressions after doing the raid and what we can expect in the future going forward. I've so far raided BWL 2 times and managed to get some decent parses. The first run was very good and I kept my world buffs through the whole run. But the second run was way worse. I died quite early and I didn't really have a good chance to do any good parses after that. But that's the life of classic raiding. It can't go well every time. I will have some good parts of my BWL running in the background while I talk a little bit about the bosses and what you can do to get an edge when it comes to doing maximum DPS. Starting off with Razorgore, there isn't really much to say here. You will most likely be stuck in a corner and waiting for mobs to spawn and trying to hit them as much as possible, while the guy who's controlling the boss is destroying the eggs. You should focus on trying to preserve as much mana as possible for Razorgore himself, so avoid using consecration too much unless you are facing more than 3 mobs at the same time. If you want, you can spend a little bit extra mana in the beginning and use a mana pot early, because you will get the cooldown up again before the boss comes on. When phase 2 begins after all the eggs are destroyed, you can start to nuke Razorgore, but you need to be careful because it does an AoE stun that lasts for several seconds. The best way to avoid this is to use a free action potion. This will of course put your mana potion on cooldown, but the Razorgore fight itself is quite short, so you shouldn't really need it, and you can use a Dark Rune or a Demonic Rune instead if you need some extra mana. Overall, the DPS numbers for this fight will be really bad, but that's just the nature of the fight with all the ads and long waiting times when you're not really doing anything, so it will be bad for everyone. Moving on to the next boss is Vaelastrasz. Vaelastrasz is interesting in the fact that you get unlimited mana, which is often a big issue for Retribution Paladins. The problem on the other hand is that the fight is very short, in which case the unlimited mana doesn't really give us any benefit since we wouldn't go anyway. Vael also starts at 30% HP, which makes it extra juicy for classes with an execute ability like warriors and paladins. This should in theory increase our damage we do on this fight. Unfortunately, for AP reds, using Hammer of Wrath can often be worse than not using it, because your swing timer is stopped when you're casting, and as an AP your hammer is not gonna hit very hard, so most of the time it's not actually worth using it, at least if you're AP. But if you are a hybrid or a Paladin, it's much more worth to use Hammer of Wrath. I decided to try Paladin for both my runs on Vael, because I believed that it would yield the best result being able to spam Hammer of Wrath with a lot of spell power. The problem however was that some of my spells got resisted, like my Judgement of Righteousness got resisted on both fights several times. I also didn't get a single crit with Hammer of Wrath in any of the fights, so I think it was a little bit bad luck on my part. After you have managed to combat the suppression room, you will encounter Broodlord Lashlayer. Broodlord is another easy fight which is also more or less tank and spank. It's possible to get some extra damage for the logs here by attacking the dragon whelps that you will most likely aggro before encountering the boss. So you can throw a zapper on them or some consecration while letting the tanks put the boss in position. Other than that, all you need to know on this fight is to position yourself correctly against the wall, because Broodlord does a Fire Nova with a long knockback, and you don't want to get knocked away to lose time on attacking the boss. And also make sure you're not standing on the tank or in front of the boss, so he can parry your attacks. The next boss is Firemaw, which is probably one of the bosses that causes the most wipes overall for guilds. Because of how the debuff works and how long it lasts, this is going to be one of the worst fights number-wise for us. But there are a few things you can do in order to increase your DPS a little bit on this fight. First off is using your bubble correctly. You should use your bubble to clear your stacks and being able to continue DPSing for twice as long as all the other melee. As you can see in the background on my Firemaw kill, I do this and get a big advantage in the beginning, even compared to the warriors and rogues who has to run away and hide. This will be more beneficial the faster you manage to kill Firemaw, since then this will have a bigger impact. It's also possible to resist the debuff, allowing you to stay in longer. This can be done by having some extra fire resistance. I would not recommend, however, going out of your way to get a lot of fire resistance, but if you can get a little extra and not losing too much power, that could be a good idea. For example, you could use your fire resistance aura instead of your sunk aura. Ebonroc is next, and is also an easy boss which comes down to mostly tank and spank. I don't really have a lot to say here, so instead I would like to showcase my own kill, where I used seal twisting with great success to get a good parse. As you will see, seal twisting does cost a lot of mana, which makes me go in the end, so it's only recommended for hybrids unless the fight is very short. I will also be making a seal twisting tutorial video in a little bit, hopefully in the next week or so, where I will go over exactly how to seal twist properly and why it's so good. The third and final dragon is Flamegor, which is even easier than the previous two, and for us it's also a tank and spank fight. I also seal twisted a little bit on this fight, but it did not go as well as on Ebonroc, so the result was a little bit worse, but it was still decent. Coming up on the second to last boss, and one of the most iconic bosses in BWL, we got Chromaggus. Chromaggus is a very bad fight for us, since it's resistant to holy damage during the whole fight. This makes Seal of Command, Judgement of Command, Seal of Righteousness, Judgement of Righteousness, Consecration and all other holy damage effects deal very low damage. I think the best way to deal with this is to just auto-attack with Seal of the Crusader on. You can use your mana to help cleanse the debuff on other melees and yourself, and if you want you can also use some of the mana to drop a consecration or two, but it's not gonna make a lot of difference in your DPS. Chromaggus does however get vulnerable to other schools of magic every now and then, which could give you a small damage boost by using either Frost Oil, Shadow Oil, Sapper Charge, Dragon Breath Chili or the Dark Moon Maelstrom trinket, and other items or consumables that deal various forms of magic damage. Most of these however are not controlled by you when they proc, which means it's going to be a lot of RNG if they decide to proc when he's vulnerable or not. Most of the time they won't, but sometimes they will, and then you will get a large damage boost. And also if you get hit by one of the breaths, or two breaths maybe, you can use your bubble to clear all the debuffs on yourself. Some of them are curses which you can't dispel yourself, so using your bubble just to remove curses and other debuffs could be a good way to minimize the DPS loss. Last boss is Nefarian, the big bad dragon. The fight starts off with the raid split and you killing ads for a few minutes. You can use your mana here because you will get out of combat after you've killed all the adds, and for a short while until Nefarian lands. But you don't have that much time to drink though, so I would recommend saving at least between 30 to 50% of your mana to make sure that you are at 100% when Nefarian comes. Another thing you need to do is swap back to your normal DPS cloak after Nefarian hits you with the Shadow Flame Breath. The Nefarian fight itself is very straightforward. Don't go in front of him or behind him and just DPS like normal. Every now and then he will do the class calls which could impact you in different ways, but most of the time it doesn't affect you very much. When Nefarian hits 20%, all the adds from phase 1 will come rushing back at you and the healers, and this is your time to shine, because all the adds are undead, which makes it very beneficial for you to use Holy Wrath and hit a lot of targets for a lot of damage. You should also use Holy Water from Stratholm or a Sapper Charge and try to hit as many of them as possible. And if you are worried that you might get aggro and die from them, you can pre-bubble and then you won't get any aggro. Looking at the logs from these first 2 weeks, the result seems pretty grim for Retribution Paladins across the board, but I contribute this mostly due to people not being very familiar with Blackwing Lair overall, and most guilds have some issues with tactics and stuff like that. So with time I think the logs will go up quite significantly for everybody. That said though, there is a couple of fights where we will basically never have good parses, or well, good DPS numbers I should say, and those are Chromaggus and Firemaw mostly. Other than that, I think it's mostly tank and spank bosses which we have good chances of getting some good numbers on. On the other hand, there isn't really a lot of AoE fights like in Molten Core, so you can't really get any good numbers on fights like if you were AoEing on Major Domo or Gar or something like that in Molten Core. There isn't really any of those fights, except maybe Nefarian. And just before I end this video, I would also like to show you a little neat trick that could help you get safely into BWL and keeping your precious world buffs. If you are on a server like me, where there are tons of enemy faction players standing around BWL entries at raid time, blocking the orb or making it very hard to click it and trying to kill you at the same time, I have the solution for you. There is a graphic setting that when you change it, it will reload all the player models. This can be used to remove all the player models on your screen for a brief moment, allowing you to freely click the orb without any problems. All you need to do is make 2 macros with this setting which change, and you can click between them and all the models will disappear. You can see the macro here on the screen, and I will also link it in the description. Anyway, that was everything for me today. I hope you are raiding BWL and having fun, and hoping you get some good loot, and I will see you later on. Until next time, Judgement out.